Okay. Um, Today's movie is probably one that very few of you have heard of. It's this 1983 cult film that I've been really obsessed with lately called Eddie and the Cruisers. And okay, you gotta talk about plot. The plot of the movie is basically that in the early 60s, this rock and roll group, Eddie and the Cruisers, had a hit album, Tender Years, and then within a year they lost their sax player, and their lead singer, Eddie Wilson, mysteriously died, or at least vanished. No one really knows. No one found his body, so they don't know if he's alive or not. And then we cut to the present day, well, present day being 1984, which was 34 years ago. Um, well, it took place in 1983. The movie came out in 83. At any rate, so what ends up happening is that um, this media magazine journalist Maggie Foley starts this documentary to figure out what happened with this band. Is Eddie Wilson still alive? And what led between the rise and the fall of the band, and what happened with their second album entitled "A Season in Hell." Um, Alrighty, so first of all, I would like to talk about the faults. I mean, I really love this movie, but just because you enjoy something, it doesn't automatically mean you have to praise it as this masterwork. There are a lot of problems with it. And the first thing is the idea of trying to make Eddie Wilson a mysterious rock and roll icon. The problem with that is I don't have a problem with them trying to make it hard to understand or having it be a little mysterious. It's just I don't really feel like we got to know Eddie Wilson as a character that well. All we really know is that he wants to be a great musician, and he's kind of like, yeah, the tough guy, yeah, you know. He's just basically, it's basically, I think Roger Ebert once described that performance as like Richard Gere mixed with Bruce Springsteen, which is there's a little more on that in a minute. Um, yeah, and I mean, I get if you're trying to make someone mysterious, I know you can't have them throughout the entire running time of the film because then there's really no mystery. But I feel like we never really got a chance to get to know this guy well. I mean, there's a difference between intriguing mystery and then knowing little to nothing about the character. So I think that's kind of a problem right there. And on top of that, another problem that I think we have. No, I'm doing a video. Sorry. uh, so I think another so that's a big problem right there. And um, another problem that we have with the movie is that and I had a script written out for this. Now I'm having a hard time remembering what I wrote. Um, there's constant talks throughout the movie saying that the recording sessions for A Season in Hell were rough, that it was tough. They keep talking about the bad times that the band had, even though the movie has this charming, nostalgic feel to it. But the problem is that they never really show the hardships with the recording of A Season in Hell. All we really get is Eddie feeling broken up over losing his sax player and best friend Wendell Newton. But we just don't really see that much of the recording session. And again, sometimes less is more, but then there are sometimes where less is less. I feel like if we had gotten to see the band starting to fall apart instead of having people talk about it, because there's so much great acting where they're talking about how they love the past, even though there are parts that really hurt them. And again, if they really wanted to get the point across that Eddie was driven by ambition and it was tearing the band apart while it was already falling apart to begin with, you need to show it instead of talking about it and then not showing any of the stuff of what's going on in flashbacks until it reaches its breaking point. And the reason why that hurts is that Eddie says something when he breaks down after getting his album rejected. And his friend, the bass player Sal Amato, is like, "Look, Eddie, we're not great. We're just a bunch of guys from Jersey." And then Eddie says, "If we can't be great, then there's no sense in ever playing music again, Sal." And I feel like that's a very powerful line, but I think if they had shown more of the struggle and the frustration everyone was going through, I think if they had shown that more, then I think that line would have been more powerful. I'm not saying we had to see every single thing that happened, but I'm saying if we saw a few scenes building up to that, then the payoff would have been better. It's just the payoff wasn't there because there was no build up. So that's sorry, I'm getting over a cold, folks. As you can see, I just showered. Um, the problem I have with this, well, I mean, that's all my bad stuff about the movie. The thing that really works about it is that the acting is very solid. I mean, Michael Paré is sort of like a generic tough guy. The guy who plays Eddie Wilson, Michael Paré is a generic tough guy. But Matthew Lawrence, who plays Salamato, is great. Tom Berenger, who I think is the heart and soul of the movie, is really good. And I also like the soundtrack. The soundtrack, when they were making the movie, they had a lot of ideas of what kind of bands they wanted to have the movie band sound like. But when director Martin Davidson realized that the band they're talking about, this fictional band, is really a New Jersey esque band, they decided to do a Bruce Springsteen ripoff. And they found this band in Rhode Island, John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band, who did the entire soundtrack. And yeah, Michael Paré was dubbed by the band. The only performers in the movie that were actual musicians was Michael Atunes Tunes and Helen Schneider, who played. Well, Atunes played Wendell Newton, and Helen Schneider played Eddie's girlfriend, Joanne Carlino. And yeah, it does kind of mimic the band lineup of Bruce Springsteen. I mean, you got the tough guy from Jersey with raspy vocals. You got a black guy on sax. You have a best friend who's also in the band, and you have the band leader's girlfriend being a backup singer. That was kind of the time when that lineup for Bruce and Clarence Clemens, who's always been there, and then they had Bruce's future wife with them at that point. I'm getting sidetracked. I'm sorry. Um, so I think what makes this movie work is the nostalgic time capsule that the music gives. It's like listening to a song that brings you back to the summers of your 20s and of your carefree youth. That's kind of what I feel like the music is kind of getting across, where everything just seemed perfect. You didn't have to worry about anything. There was very few responsibilities and deadlines and commitments. So I think that's why people love the music because it just brings you back to a simpler, more innocent stage. And I also think that the Season in Hell album gets rejected by the record company because it's not what they're used to. And I think that's some really good commentary as well about how some people in the music business are afraid to take risks. They feel like if something's new or weird, then don't bother. It's not what we're used to. Don't mess with it. And I think what this movie does show is just how a band can fall apart so quickly and what happens when an artist isn't fully allowed to explore